Subtlety is probably the last thing you'd expect from a game that lets you dish out this amount of disrespect, but there are a lot of things to Sifu that you're only gonna notice after you become intimately familiar with each and every stage. Just like I did, because my autistic ass cannot be handed a game where perfect completion is a possibility without me tryharding the shit out of it. And that's what I did, and probably in the least optimal way possible, and by that I mean that I tried to complete each and every stage at 20 years old before I ever glanced at the next one. In other words, I played each stage many times, to the point where I had the whole skill tree unlocked before ever entering the museum. And with each consecutive run, I started to notice more and more details that might have gone unnoticed by people less delusional than I am. And since I was running out of video ideas, you're going to sit here and listen to me talk about all the little things I noticed for 13 minutes straight. Let's begin with the first stage, the squats. The squats are residential blocks of an abandoned industrial sector of the city that has now been occupied by a gang, and every building is jam-packed with hooligans and bad marketing strategies. Some of the rooms still have memories of their former tenants, such as photographs or oddly intricate vases, and it stands in contrast with all the trash that litters the place. Since a good part of the stage takes place inside hallways and cramped apartments, the feeling of claustrophobia is almost ever present, and the aesthetics absolutely carry it. As you progress through the squats, you'll notice how some of the areas are overgrown, as you'd expect from anywhere that has been left abandoned for a while. But this is no accident. Despite taking place in an industrial sector, a place that would typically be associated with pollution, the central element of this stage is nature. I may be reading a little bit too much into this, but this stage is a reflection of the boss. Fajar is one of the men responsible for killing the main character's father, and he is the boss of this level. He's the gang's botanist, responsible for growing and cultivating a special plant that gets processed into some sort of drug, and from the look of it, they are making bank. If you manage to unlock this room, you'll learn that Fajar has been suffering from an unknown illness, but after getting treatment from Yang, the last boss of the game, his condition had stabilized. This is reflected in the stage by how the place used to be a claustrophobic, crowded, polluted set of apartment buildings, but now nature and natural sunlight is reclaiming it. It's not fully healed, but it's on its way toward it. We can even see this parallel in his boss fight, as it starts in a repurposed warehouse and ends in a lush bamboo forest. Quite an impressive sight when the boss AI works. As we walk down a hidden alleyway, we come face to face with the giant neon signs of the club. Remember this scene, it will be important later. There's a private party going on here, as well as a fighting tournament known as a burning event. That name is very much intentional, as you'll see that the motif of flames and fire are everywhere in this stage. The neon sign you see at the reception is the kanji for fire, and the moment you step into the proper club, the first thing you'll see projected on that big screen is the kanji for flame. Flame patterns adorn the neon art on the walls, and the lighting is often warm and red, mimicking natural fire light. This stage is a lot less linear than the squats, and it's also the stage I had to replay the most to get it perfectly. From this initial room, you can either go to the left or to the right. Following through either path will eventually land you on the boss, but the left path has more enemies, and that's the one I'll be taking because my mother didn't raise a fucking pussy. Progressing through this path will eventually land you on a fighting rink, and this is where a little cool thing happens that I only noticed as I was recording runs for this video. Almost every room until this point had some element of red lighting to it, except for this fighting ring. The lighting here is entirely blue, and this is very much intentional by the developers to enhance the effect of this stage's gimmick. Just as your fist connects with the last enemy's chin, the entire room changes into a red dojo. You are no longer in the club. The architecture is now that of a traditional Chinese village that has been very fittingly set ablaze, and there's that symbol once again. One opponent later, things seemingly go back to normal as you regain access to a new area. Once again, the lighting here is mostly blue and purple, and the moment you step through the door, you're once again transported into the blazing city. The more we progress through the stage, the less time we spend on the actual club, and the more time we spend on what I assume is the boss's domain expansion. We only have one corridor left, and then it's flames all the way to the end. Speaking of which, does this scene look familiar? The end of the stage has the exact same layout as the beginning. It's the same alleyway, the same descent, the little corridor, and the big open area with the lower dance floor. This is where you fight the last enemies before the boss, and I sure hope you've learned how to parry by now, because little bro, you're gonna need it. One thing I noticed as I played is that the very first scene of every stage somehow foreshadows the end. The first one showed the warehouse we were headed to, the second one showed the alleyway that we walked down before the boss, and here in the museum is no different. The motifs here are related with duality, yin and yang, and the corresponding element is water. And the very first thing we see is this banner announcing the exposition, which is very fittingly called The Flood. We see two silhouettes of the stage's boss, Kuroki, a larger colored one as well as a white one contained within it. The camera descends to reveal an upside-down silhouette depicting a darker color, the reflection, yin and yang. The clean, minimalistic architecture stands in contrast with the previous areas as well. The walls of the museum are often adorned with poetic sentences, often referencing something to do with water, duality, or emotion. We have 4 floors to go through, each one containing a different part of the exposition. The first one is identity, and a common factor found in the artworks of this area is that they often depict either humans or living creatures that have somehow been made unrecognizable, either by covering their faces or stripping them of everything that gives them individuality. We also find these dolls here. They are the symbol that will be following us throughout the stage. And one last thing of note is that the path we follow through the exhibition sort of resembles the flow of a river, with undulating trajectories and little islets here and there. In the next floor we find Cycle, which is probably the one I had the hardest time interpreting. The artworks displayed in this first section are all related to color. This first room is adorned with is that Shy Lily? The first room is adorned with colored panels and these little hanging paint balloons that you can actually use to throw at enemies, but they only work in this room and not the other ones I tested. The next one is a lot more monochromatic, with a giant kunai that spills black paint in the shape of a circle. A cycle, if you will. Also take note of the art on the walls, yet another foreshadow of the boss fight. On the next floor we have Twins, and I actually want to read the description of this one. Great art is often duplicated, copied, referenced. Artists working on series and variations of the same theme are the core of this display. Will you choose to look at the subtle differences or focus on the uncanny similarities? And like, they say that, but there are only 2 artworks in the next room that actually have something to do with the theme. First we have these plates, which seem perfectly mirrored at first, but the more you look at them, the more you'll notice how they are ever so subtly misplaced. We also have these color portraits. Sometimes they are of one person, sometimes they are of twins, but they never use the same color. Except for this one. But let me draw your attention to the fact that this floor has black walls while the previous one had white walls, yin and yang once again. Next up we have one of the most impressive rooms of the stage, Shinobi Flying Dance, where we have these 2 statues that you constantly think are gonna come to life. Twin sisters, each one representing one side of the taijutsu. Also in this room we have this new intimidating enemy, and it's really funny because if you picked up the knife you can just one-shot him. The last display lies on the last floor, and it's called the Hidden Cell. Fittingly, it has no description, and the entrance is not a conventional one, but just like the others, it plays with perspective. If you go to just the right spot, these hanging panels align to form the entrance to the final display. Once again, we see the silhouette of Kuroki. This is where the line between reality and art mix. The rest of the level is an alternate between the museum and some domain expansion fuckery. We're tossed into a rainy abyss where we confront many enemies, and among them, a pair of twins. Right after that we have a Shining reference as well as another play in perspective of that blue circle. We begin in a wide corridor, and as we walk, the blue gradually fills our vision as we go through artworks depicting various emotional stages: loss, pain, anger, and rage. Portraits of Kuroki adorn the hallway, first a placid one, then one split in the middle, and finally one with a maniac expression as the emotions increase in intensity, right until we reach the final and most surreal part of the exhibition. All you see are silhouettes and pretty lights as the artworks recount Kuroki's story, but remember to keep an eye out for enemies hiding among the sculptures. At the end of the section, the twin statues that have been haunting us through the whole stage finally come to life, and we get to fight them. It all culminates as you reach the top of the museum, a garden coated in snow where you face off against Kuroki. The first phase is a Kill Bill reference, I think, but the second one is where all the symbolism we saw throughout the stage finally pays off. Kuroki shifts from yin to yang, and we're transported to the paint dimension. Not too dissimilar to the art on the room of the kunai. I just love how the second phase is foreshadowed even in the first scene of the stage, and interestingly enough, there's a lore reason why the museum is so centered in duality. You might have figured this out by now, but Kuroki has a late twin sister, and given all the symbolism, we're basically getting to see how the grief consumes her and that pain becomes the driving force of her art. Pretty cool, and probably the coolest thing in this boss fight is that her reflection in the water is her version of phase 1. This stage is absolutely delectable. The pattern of the first scene foreshadowing the end of the stage continues with this one. Pay attention to this image. The tower's pseudo gimmick is that it breaks your expectation as you progress through the map. The first example is right here on the lobby, where nobody even attacks you on sight, with the exception of these clocks attacking my eyes because the minute hands are supposed to be synchronized. But the main thing is that the people here are chill, they are even welcoming of you. The receptionist says that Jin Feng, the stage's boss, is waiting for you. They don't even beat you up, you're just welcomed into the building and take an elevator that goes straight to her office. And sure enough, she doesn't even attack you, she just talks to you and then she disappears and her ghosts start to beat you up. But let me bring your attention to something else. This is where the devs fumbled the bag. Jin Feng doesn't have her right arm, yet her computer is on the right side of her desk, underneath a bunch of drawers. It's not a laptop, it's a full-on monitor, so it's not the most mobile thing in the world. Not only that, but the fucking mouse is on the right side of the computer, which ergonomically speaking means that she needs to reach with her left arm to use it. Shit attention to detail, 0 out of 10, literally unplayable. As we continue through the stage, take note of the primary colors, yellow and golden tones, associated with Jinfeng's element of earth. The first part of the stage is comprised of these neat office rooms, their aesthetic perfectly placid, and the walls adorned with generic entrepreneurial phrases telling the employees to be diligent and work hard. The first thing I thought when I saw this was, typical corporate lingo. It's obvious that Jinfeng is just an evil, greedy CEO and this is just a facade, but she actually seems to be a good person. Her corporation offers humanitarian aid to impoverished areas, and look how good she is, always willing to put her hands to work. Wait, once again, the stage catches you by surprise. Just as the idea that Jinfeng maybe wasn't all that bad starts to develop in your mind, you get to this area. A surveillance room where she keeps track of all the other bosses as well as what appear to be targets with their faces crossed off. And then this happens.
I see you. We see you.
This room is a bit too ominous for a humanitarian organization. A slightly scary detail is that on the screens you can see that Jinfeng has been keeping tabs on you throughout the whole game. She has cameras on all the other 3 stages you've been through. In the meeting room right next to it we have portraits of a couple of employees. I don't recall seeing these two, but we see these two on the section right after our first title. This is the head of security and this is the vice president. This elevator section is when the domain expansion fuckery properly begins, as we never reach the bottom of the building. We are instead transported into this pit that is not too dissimilar to the first scene we've seen at the beginning of the stage. There are 2 rooms of note here. First, this war room. The details here are related to the lore of the game and I don't really want to linger too much on it, but basically these 4 banners are respective of the Kung Fu schools and the elements. We have wood, water, earth and fire from left to right. The element of material is conspicuously absent, and coincidentally it's the one associated with Yang, the final boss of the game. Next one is the Forge, where we can find the weapons each of the bosses used during the game's opening sequence. And finally, all the way in the bottom we get to fight the 70-year-old version of Gyome Himejima. Thankfully her health is about what you'd expect from her age. One stage left, the Sanctuary. After giving this place a thorough inspection, the main conclusion I've arrived is that I need to go there now. But it's a shame because this is the last stage and there really aren't that many details here. There are a couple of sentences here and there, as well as some of the references to the 5 elements, for example these posters. Each one of them has a pattern that makes up the logo for the Sanctuary. There's also this room before the boss, which has these 4 panels, each one representing one of the previous bosses. Oh, and you can also jump out of this window. Also, these posters basically tell a story of a search for immortality, and there are a bunch of lines at the entrance that I assume are poetry. But yeah, there isn't really a lot to see in the Sanctuary, even in Yang's room. One last cool detail is that the second phase does take place in the same patio where he killed the main character's father in the beginning of the game. But unless I'm missing something, that's basically all I had on Sifu. And in case you're wondering whether I actually managed to finish Yang's boss fight at 20 years old, well, no. As it turns out, my mother did, in fact, raise a fucking pussy.